Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody. Welcome to this much eagerly anticipated LinkedIn Live that we're doing, which is focusing around generative AI and ChatGPT, trying to separate some of the fact from the fiction. We've got a really great set of questions and conversation that we want to take today. First of all, I'd love to get the audience to participate a little bit, just so we can get a real sense as to where everyone's based. It gives us a real chance to make maybe some of our comments regional or specific. So we'd love to get you to comment in the chat in terms of where you're watching from today. My name's David Rickard. I'm a partner here at Everest Group. I lead a couple of our practice areas, specific focus around customer experience management and sourcing and vendor management. We've got a real interest in this area, but I'm joined by a couple of real experts today as well in terms of Anil and Andrew. So first of all, I'll ask Anil to maybe just do a brief introduction of yourself.
Thanks, David. Hi, everyone. My name is Anil Vijayan. I'm a partner with Everest Group as well. And my focus areas are automation, AI, and all the next generation technologies that we track. I'm based out of London and really look forward to the conversation. Andrew?
Brilliant. Thanks, Anil. Andrew?
Brilliant. Hi, everyone. My name is Andrew Burgess. I'm an AI strategist and ethicist. I'm the founder of Greenhouse Intelligence. We help organizations with their AI strategy, implementation, and ethics. I'm the author of a book called The Executive Guide to Artificial Intelligence, which was published a couple of years ago. I'm visiting senior fellow at Loughborough University for RPA and AI, and also expert in residence at Imperial College in London, and also a member of the British Standard Institute AI committee as well, so helping shape AI standards for the UK.
Brilliant. Thanks, Andrew. And you can see why I said that we've got some real experts. Andrew's making me feel pretty small now in terms of my knowledge of this area, but I think we can have an interesting conversation. And thanks for everyone who's put the comments in the chat in terms of where people are based. And just the very brief sort of demonstration, we've got people from the UK in Edinburgh, we've got Dublin in Ireland, we've got people in Florida, Dallas, Athens, Canada, Asia, southwest of the UK, Istanbul. So really good global audience. So I think this really shows the breadth of the interest in this area. So thank you, and please keep those coming, because we love to know where our audience are based. So we'll get into the content, because you don't want to just hear me ramble on a little bit. And maybe we'll start with you, Anil. I mean, we can't do a conversation these days without touching on ChatGPT. It feels like that is the topic everyone, even if they're not into technology, has heard of ChatGPT. And so can you just give us a sense as to what we've seen, why we've seen it gain so much traction since launch? What's your feelings? And then maybe we'll get Andrew to put a comment in there as well.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So I think, the whole buzz around some of these constructs started with GPT-3 in some ways. So in around late 2021 or early 2022, OpenAI provided unrestricted access to their GPT-3 API. And then everyone started noticing that, these LLMs, or large language models, they have capability to produce outputs which are very, very similar to what a human would produce, right? It kind of became almost indistinguishable. So there was a great deal of interest at that point, but amongst potentially a smaller audience. So you think about, folks who are more, let's say, interested in AI, technologists, and the developer crowd as well. But then, things really changed when the ChatGPT interface kind of became available. And I think, at least I can't recall anything in the last decade or so which has really captured the popular imagination to this extent, right? And one of the things about that was, obviously, it was available to the general public in a form which was very usable. So not an API, but rather a chatbot. And I have some statistics here on how it did. So I believe it reached around 1 million users in 5 days, 100 million in 2 weeks, 30 million daily visitors. And these are all really, really unprecedented numbers. Now, we also have GPT-4, which has, promised multimodal capabilities, which means it would work with non-text inputs as well, mainly images. It's not well, not necessarily as much buzz as ChatGPT, but I think two things could change that if it really lives up to the hype. One is the image capabilities becoming available to the general public or through APIs and so on. And then the second one is the integration with Office 365. I'm sure a lot of us have seen demos of how that could work. And those of us in the technology world know that demos are often not as great as reality, but even if it is 60-70% of what was shown in the demos, that could be a real game changer. Andrew, I don't know what is your perspective on what we've seen so far.
Yeah, I think the thing for me is like everything's moving so fast, isn't it? These LLMs have been around for a while, and we've been talking about this and looking at it, etc. But now everything's reached public consciousness, and it's like the floodgates have opened. I think people will look back on November 2022 when GPT 3.5 was released as ChatGPT as kind of a pivotal moment in the AI world. We'll look at it back at like, this is when the iPhone was launched. This is when they launched ChatGPT. It's going to have that much impact on people's lives, the way they work, etc. And the other interesting thing as well is that, when we first started talking about doing this event, a month or 2 months ago, so much has happened since then as well. You think, right, I'm going to prepare for this event, but even like almost every day, there's something new come out. We've had the API released, we've had plugins released, we've had it being banned in certain countries. This is happening on a unprecedentedly fast scale. It's almost too difficult to keep up. But I think it's fascinating. But as Spider-Man's Uncle Ben famously said, with great power comes great responsibility. And we have huge amounts of power here, and the more power, the more responsibility we have to have. So that's the thing that people need to kind of keep at the back of their mind as we look at these things. And I think later on, David, we're going to talk about some of the risks as well of these models as well. But just keeping up with everything is a major challenge, even for consultants and analysts like us as well. It's the floodgates have literally opened. So.
Yeah, and it's an interesting one because I think, as I said in my intro, I focus a lot on customer experience management, and there's a lot of talk around how it's going to impact customer experience management and the need for conversational AI, but even the need for agents. But we've not necessarily seen the need for agents drop considerably since we've even introduced things like conversational AI. So I think there's always going to be that people element. But how do you think the large language models such as GPT are going to affect the way we work? What's the thinking from you guys in terms of how's it going to change the way that we do our daily work, and who's it going to maybe have the biggest impact on? What's the thinking there?
Yeah, so I can maybe take a stab at that, and then Andrew, you can chip in as well. Yeah. So I think so. Just to go back to what Andrew was mentioning about language models, it may be useful at this point just to give a brief background about what language model is, right? Which can lead into a better understanding of what these can actually do. So first, what is a language model? So essentially, it's something that can predict the next word given a string of words, right? So it does that stochastically or in a probabilistic manner. And these language models, as Andrew mentioned, they have existed for some time now. In fact, even in the pre-machine learning era, you had n-gram models and so on. And then with deep learning, etc., you move to recurrent neural networks and LSTMs. But I think one of the things to be aware of, there's a particular thing that kind of pushed this forward quite a bit, which was the introduction of transformer models and the transformer architectures, based on those models. And the reason why this is important is because it introduced a couple of things. So one is attention mechanisms. So attention mechanisms, essentially, it ends up reducing the information bottlenecks that we had in recurrent neural networks. So in more general terms, what this means is that, in some of the traditional models, there was a limitation in terms of the number of words you could totally look back at when determining the next word, right? So if you had a dependency, let's say very early in the sentence, and it was, I don't know, a 20-word sentence, that information was pretty much lost in determining the next word or the next sequence of words, right? So transformer models introduce something called self-attention, which helps overcome this limitation to a great extent. So that was, I think, one big change. The second thing is the older language models, they relied on more sequential operations. So if you, in a recurrent neural network kind of construct, you would have the output fed back into the input along with the next word and so on. So that made it very sequential. But the new transformer architectures, it's possible to actually do that in parallel using GPUs. So you can actually feed it a large number of words within a sentence or a paragraph at the same time, and it becomes much more parallelizable in terms of training. So essentially, when you do that, you end up with the capability of doing a great deal of unsupervised pre-training on very, very large data sets, right? And net result is now you have these models which have been trained on these huge amounts of text. And as a result, they have gotten really good at the general language skills, right? So essentially you have a model which is really, really good, let's say at the English language or the language skills, how it relates to each other, etc. And one example of that is, of course, GPT-3, which was trained on several terabytes of text from Wikipedia, book corpuses, Common Crawl, and so on. And on top of that, you have fine tuning and reinforcement learning, which has been done to lead to more customized behaviors, right? So keeping that in mind, in essence, what we have is a model which not only has a great deal of understanding of the language skills, general language skills, but also has a knowledge base of sorts based on the pre-trained data, right? So it has the knowledge base of whatever it has been trained on. Well, not exactly as a database, but as a learned outcome. So with that in mind, we can obviously imagine many of the individual use cases. You can use it to write, let's say, first drafts of emails, marketing collaterals, blogs. You can use it for coding or at least producing code snippets in more well understood programming languages. Use it for summarization, some degree of sentiment analysis. So any task which requires the creation of general text or templates, it definitely becomes one of the places you can go to, at least for a first draft, right? The other thing which we have also seen usage of these kind of models as a general search engine. However, as I mentioned, it does not necessarily work as a search engine, right? So there's some caution to be applied here because even the training data sets are temporal in nature, so they are limited to a particular time point, right? And I believe for GPT-3 it was 2021, late 2021. That is one part of it, and the second part of it is it can also confidently spout out just incorrect information, right? So it can make up stuff very, very confidently, so that hallucination can also happen, right? But yeah, I mean, a great deal of use cases where you can actually boost your own individual productivity.
Yeah, and Andrew, sorry, just quickly before we come to you, I just want to check in. So if you have got questions, please drop them in the comments. We have also put a link to an upcoming viewpoint that we have around this topic. So it's a generative AI viewpoint, the rise of generative AI and understanding the technology. And we're offering that to people who are on this LinkedIn Live, and you can look in the comments section, and there's a link to there, or a link that where you can go and sign up. So please link into there, and please ask any questions you've got, and we'll try and answer them as we go through. But yeah, Andrew, maybe love to get your view. So, okay, I think Anil's given us some good background and a high level view, but maybe give us some real examples, or I think you're even thinking of showing us a demo. Like, how is this actually going to impact people from a real everyday perspective?
Yeah, so I'm going to use the adage of show don't tell, and give you just 5 minutes of demo for those of you who haven't seen ChatGPT in action. I'll try and And this is a live demo, which I know is always a risky thing to do on a live webinar, but you know,
we haven't got pets or children, so it's fine. So,
yeah,
so they always say keep
exactly.
away pets, children, and live demos. So we've only got one of the three. So
exactly. So what you can see here is ChatGPT Plus. It's the paid version. So it's like always on access, rather than some of you who are on the free version may found that it's not always available. So if you pay $20 a month, you get guaranteed access. It's a browser-based application. So I thought I'd just start with an easy question here, which is write me a job description for a data scientist in the biomedical sector. And I've given some information in terms of the sort of experience they want. And you can see the speed of response. This is ChatGPT 3.5. And you can see the speed of response is really good. It's giving us a good, pretty much everything you would want for a job description, and then I think one of the things, in answer to your question, David, is a lot of this is around augmentation. So this is a really good starter for 10 for somebody who wants to recruit a data scientist or whatever it may be. But there's going to be things you need to tweak, things you need to add, take away, etc. So, but it's done essentially 80% of the work that you'd want to do yourself. So you've saved yourself probably an hour of work here, just in a few seconds. So let me give you a little bit, or I'll give it a little bit more of a task here. So this is essentially something that a lawyer or a paralegal would do. We're preparing a partner agreement with a startup that has some IP, and we want you want it to write that. So you can see it's done. It's starting up really well. It's going through the purpose, confidentiality, etc. IPR, etc. So it's kind of doing what a paralegal might do. Again, something that would cost people money, something that takes time to do. This one, you'll notice it's based on American law, so it's talking about the American Arbitration Association, etc. But I live in London, so I want this in English law. So I just say rewrite this under English law. And what you can see here is the dialogue approach, which the previous versions of ChatGPT didn't have. Okay. So this is the good thing about the live demos. It's kind of come up. It goes beyond the capabilities for some reason. Previously, that would have come up, and it said that that it just rewrites it and does it into English law. But it's what it's able to do is take one statement, and then you just adding on. So you're basically going through this conversation with it. So maybe I want this in French. Let's see if this works. Okay, so it's actually just translated the bit that it's done previously, because it didn't do that. But you can see, just to demonstrate the language capabilities of this, anything you can do, you can just get it to translate into any language you want.
And
so,
Andrew, sorry, just while you're doing that, maybe
yeah.
I'll just quickly ask a question Nazanin's asked, which is what kind of job should we be ready for? Well, I think what she said, and she said, what skills should we have or improve the most? So maybe it's another way of looking at that is, which skills would be the most at risk from something like this? Do you have a view in terms of that? And as humans, are there skills that we should be developing maybe that actually we know that's not going to be able to do, and that's where we're going to differentiate ourselves as humans?
Yeah, that's a really good question. If you think back to when everyone's talking about robots, there's always going to be the manual labor that was going to be replaced. With ChatGPT and all the other models, it's those white collar jobs that are the ones that are at risk. I think, again, going back to this point about augmentation, the right way to use these tools is to adopt them, use them, and then add your own creativity, your own innovative thinking on top of that. So the people that will do well out of this are the ones that can actually use the tools, add on their own thoughts, etc. Maybe the jobs that are at risk are those very basic, content creators, the people that you might actually, just go to Mechanical Turk or one of these crowdsourcing sites to get, produce me a logo for this, or give me the basic version of this. those are the things that are at risk, because that's what, just as I've shown in this demo, that's exactly what's happening here. We're just doing that basic stuff. It's what I think what we're seeing is upskilling people's capabilities. So I wouldn't be able to write that partner agreement myself, but I've got that, and hopefully I can see where it's got weaknesses, where it's got strengths, and what things I need to add. So it's kind of upskilled what I would be able to do in my own work as well. Another example, which I've got here, is as a marketeer. So I think Anil mentioned marketing earlier on as well. I think this is a really strong use case. And what the thing I wanted to point out here particularly as well, and what this is maybe like the top tip for ChatGPT, is giving it roles to do. So it's like personas. So the first thing I've said is I want you to act as a marketeer. So it's kind of in that frame of mind of being marketing, and that kind of sets the context for what you want. So we want to create a campaign for a charity which helps children who've been diagnosed with cancer. So again, you can see it's quite straightforward campaign. It's coming up with some nice catchphrases. It's talking about media channels, some additional ideas as well about how we might do this: public speaking, collaboration with hospitals. So it's very relevant. It's not just any old charity. It's very specific to the charity that we've been talking about here. But also as well, what I can do, and Anil mentioned coding. So that's brilliant. Now we want to build a website for our charity. And it's giving me the HTML code for a website for a children's charity to do with cancer. And you can see, you don't really have to understand HTML to kind of see this, but it's got 4 pages. It's got an about us, an events, a donate page, a contact us page, all the sorts of things you would generally see. And it's even got, join us for our annual charity run, gala dinner, all these sorts of things in here as well. So it's kind of, doing a really good job. Again, starter for 10, but this is something that, that HTML people would be doing for you, but, you're kind of getting this for free.
And Andrew, sorry, if I can just stop you there. I mean, that's perfect segue into a question that we've had from Ali, which is, with ChatGPT helping me in coding, do we expect that universities will not allow to use it? But I guess from my perspective, what you said is that you've still got to know how to make it work finally. So actually, yes, you haven't got to do a lot of the legwork potentially, but you still need to have the knowledge there. But based on your work that you're doing around governance, etc., what's your thought on that?
Yeah, I think that it's that giving you the basics to do that, and being able to then tweak that and add on. So so for example, I'm looking at this and I'm thinking, actually what it doesn't include is an FAQ page, which a lot of websites have. So I've said to ChatGPT, can you add in an FAQ page? So it's understood, again, going back to this dialogue approach, it's understood that we're still talking about this cancer charity that we originally built the marketing campaign for. It's talking about the website that we built for there, and it's come through, and you can see here we've got an FAQ page in there, and in a second, hopefully you'll see it actually generate some actual FAQs within that as well, which are very specific to a cancer charity for children. So here's the FAQs coming up. Has my donation helped? Can I volunteer, etc.? So really useful. And then finally, just on this section, there might, there's some code in here that maybe I don't understand what the char set variable does. So, I can just ask it and it explains exactly what that is. So even if I'm not totally au fait with HTML, I can still actually go back and look at what we're doing as well.
So do you think universities and places like that will try to put blocks on it? I mean, a very massive question, I know, and lots of evolution. Do you think there's something that people will be considering though?
It's interesting, actually. I'll come back to that one in a second, because I've got a good example of that, because my son is at university. So I've got a very specific example. I'll just do one more quick demo here, and I'm just going to switch to GPT-4, which is the latest model.
So as you bring that up, I just want to point out that I think you're also demonstrating the fact that there is this so-called zero-shot learning which happens within that particular conversation, so you can actually build on something which was said
exactly
before.
it builds on the previous questionnaire. So that's why I clicked on new chat, because I wanted to kind of forget everything I've told it so far and then do this. So what I want to demonstrate here, just this point, is about the kind of the emotional stance that the model can take as well. Obviously, it's not being emotional. It's just some clever maths, and I keep saying that to people. It's like, nothing about this is human at all. But I'm going to ask it to write this email to my Aunt Mary, and I've asked it to be kind and caring, and about how my sister is doing since her divorce, etc. So it's building, and this is kind of, it's not a business example, but you can see how it's taken the exact tone that I wanted it to do and build that up. The other interesting thing here as well, because I switched to GPT-4 for this for a reason I'll come on to in a second, but you can see it's actually a little bit slower than 3.5, which I was showing you previously. I'm not sure if that's just the size of the model or the demand on the model, etc., or maybe they just got some breaks on that to make sure that they manage the demand on that. But you can see it's including everything I've asked it to do. It's talking about this trip to Australia, and it's just it's talking about stuff that I don't even have a sister, by the way, but it's talking about this stuff that my sister's doing, her new hobbies. She's taken up painting. So we talk about hallucination, so it's actually filling in the gaps of the email, and this is you can go back and edit that as you see fit. Just wait for that to, I think it's on the final section. And then.
And while it's doing that, Andrew, just another question from a LinkedIn user, which is ChatGPT saving everything you're doing to learn from? So everything that you've done in this demo, is it saving it and learning from that?
That's a good question. So first of all, on the left, you can see the queries that I've done already. So that's my list there. One of the issues that they had recently was they were exposing people's chat history to other people, which is one of the reasons it was banned in Italy recently. I think, and Anil, you may be able to answer this better than me, but I think OpenAI, despite their name of being anything but open about this, I think obviously it's not a dynamic training process, but they are learning from what people are asking and what the answers are as well. And you can actually in 3.5 as well, you can tell it whether it's a good answer or not as well. So it's kind of learning from that process.
Yeah, so I think in the ChatGPT TNC, I believe it's explicitly mentioned that they will store the prompts and the responses, right? And obviously, like you mentioned, Andrew, they'll use it to kind of improve the tool.
Yeah, I think Samsung, they banned it in the company because of this risk. So if you're saying, for example, as the text I put in earlier on about a marketing plan, you may say, I'm creating this new product, this new TV that does this, and this, creating a marketing plan. All that information, which is essentially confidential information, is then being sent to OpenAI. So that's one of the big risks that people need to watch out for here. Just to finish this quick example, a little bit frivolous, but just to show the change of emotion as well. So I actually want to make a sarcastic comment about my sister's ex-husband as well. So you can see, previously I was asking it to be kind and caring, and now it's made a little sarcastic comment about this fictitious person. Right, I'll go back to the question you asked earlier on, David, about the universities. So I'll just go back to here. So there we go, thank you. So my son is reading history at Southampton University, and he's about ancient Rome, and his dissertation is on about male anxiety about female autonomy in ancient Rome. So he wanted to find out some scholarly articles on that. So this is the simple question it asked, and comes up. And look, there's some really good examples of some articles with a little précis of each one. what I can tell you, and I haven't checked this one because sometimes the answers are different each time, but none of these articles exist in real life. This is all made up stuff. The titles are reasonably on theme. In many cases, the author is a real author, and the journals it's talking about are real journals. But everything else, it's pretty much made up. And that, I think, this is one of the worrying things. Talk about, it may be that the universities don't need to worry about plagiarism because it's actually making it up in itself anyway. But this I think this is one of the real dangers that we need to look at here, that people are starting to put too much trust in this. But you really have to kind of search through them. Actually, these things don't actually exist anywhere. So from a university point of view, I think they've got to be really, really careful. To a large, I always think that the genie is out of the bottle. We're not going to be able to put this back in the bottle. Despite what the Elon Musk and all the other people on that letter that they signed recently saying all development should stop, that's just not practical. It's never going to happen. People have got to learn to live with this somehow, and I think it will change the way that universities mark dissertations and what they can try and look for plagiarism as much as possible. I think it's going to be really, really difficult. So maybe they have to think about different ways of assessing how students learn, basically, because this, in the future, everyone's going to have access to this, and learning will be a different process than it is now. And particularly, when I went to school and university, it was very much about learning facts and regurgitating facts, which it's moved on from there. But I think definitely it's going to move on again. Let me show you one. Sorry, Daniel.
Sorry, so Andrew, I just want to add to that, and I think it relates to one of the other questions there. So question around, hey, can you detect if something is actually generated by AI? There are tools to do that. So I believe GPT-0 was one, and I'm sure there are other tools out there as well, which which claim to detect anything which was generated using AI. So I'm sure those tools will catch up as well. With regards to the question on whether it's going to be used in universities, I think the university context makes it somewhat more complicated because, I think in, let's say, previous generations and so on, even calculators were banned, right? In universities, you were not expected to use that. But over course of time, then, it becomes something that everyone has access to, why not use it, right? So over course of time, I don't think this will be an issue per se. It will just be another tool, but then your differentiation will come in terms of what you can really build on top of it.
Brilliant.
So yeah,
David, I just want to show one more thing, if that's okay, because I think
if we can do one, and then I think we can change gears a little bit and talk more about the question we were sort of wanting to cover, which is sort of what is generative AI beyond sort of the large language models like GPT. But yeah, one more quickly one I think would be
good. So this is, I think, talk about the use cases, going back to the original question about how this is going to be used. So at the moment we've been asking general questions, and it's been using the training set, which is basically the internet, to answer those questions. I think where it's going to be really, really useful is when you're pointing at specific data sources. For example, your corpus of information within your own company, and asking it to answer questions only on that data. I think that's where the real value comes in. So one of the things they've released recently is an API, which allows you kind of direct interaction with the model rather than through the browser. I'm going to show you this. This is, don't get scared by the code, but this is just code to access the API. What I wanted to show here is just one document which I've asked it to look at, which is this bit here, which is a clinical trial adverse event report. So if you go in the clinical trial, a patient's had an adverse event because of the drugs they've been given. So the doctor fills out a report, and you can see it's a mixture of some information, some tick boxes, and some commentary at the bottom. So just one document, quite a simple example. But what you can do is ask it specific questions about that document. So, this is where the hallucinations kind of disappear, because we're focusing just on this. So here I asked it, what's the study name? And it said it's, because it's a dummy document, XYZ123 drug trial. What's the event date? So it's very simple stuff. What action was taken? What was the outcome? And then really interestingly, so the last question I asked it was just summarize this document at the bottom here. So you can see it's done a good job. It's taken what is essentially very structured data and some tick boxes as well, and actually put that into a really useful narrative that would be, actually the patient can read or the doctor can read. And particularly if you've got a lot of these as well, you can actually summarize a lot of the documents as well. So for me, I think this is where ChatGPT and the others are going to be much more useful when we're looking at within the corporate environment and your own corpus of information.
Brilliant. Thanks, Andrew. No, that's really, really useful example. So maybe switching gears a little bit. I mean, and so I think when you talk about generative AI, maybe people do immediately just think of ChatGPT, and technically maybe that's not even what we're talking about. So what else is out there, or what are we seeing beyond just the large language models? And maybe Anil, do you want to sort of take a start of that?
Yeah, sure. So I think first it's important to mention that we interact with AI in our day-to-day settings. Maybe we don't see it as much, but if you're, let's say, using social media, there is AI in the background there, likely capturing what you do, what kind of preferences you have, maybe classifying you as a particular user, and then potentially feeding you ads for that particular category, and so on and so forth. So in that sense, I would say AI is well on its way to being industrialized. So it's not necessarily net new, right? But generative AI in that sense is relatively newer. And if we talk about generative AI, I have a slide up here as well. Hopefully I can get that up. But the point being, so generative AI is essentially any sort of AI which can generate some sort of output, right? And typically this is any of the media elements that we are very familiar with. So text, image, audio, video, and it can generate these based on different kinds of input, right? So you can have text to text, you can have text to video, you can have image to text, you can even have just noise to image. So any sort of these combinations, wherever there is utility technically, or at least theoretically, you can have generative AI there. Now, I know LLMs have sort of caught the limelight, but there are various other models out there which do some of these, and they have been in existence for some time, right? But the thing to keep in mind is that not all of these are necessarily as good as text to text. So, for example, if you look at text to video, it may not be all that great at this point in time. It may have some serious limitations, in terms of compute power, and the output itself may not be as great. But over course of time, this is definitely likely to get better. So the first four mentioned here are those the ones which are those media elements which I spoke about, convert from one to another. And the last three in some ways are derivatives, right? So you have things like code generation, which you could potentially say is an extension or is a very specialized form of let's say LLMs, right? And again, going back to the question on whether universities ban it, and some of these tools have been around for a bit, right? So I think GitHub had Copilot for some time before ChatGPT came along, and you have had these tools in existence. It's just that it's really caught on fire now. Synthetic data generation is another one which can be used to create data to train specialized AI models outside of LLMs and these generative AI ones. And then you have 3D asset generation, again, all of these being an extension of those first four categories. Andrew, is there anything I've missed out here? I mean, I'm sure there are categories I've missed out here, but anything in particular comes to mind?
No, I think the thing to add on to that is the applications that are starting to be built around these as well. So we talked about the API. So if you've got access to the API, you can build software around that to make it easy for people to use. And obviously, Microsoft have a big investment in OpenAI as well. So they built it into a lot of the products that they've got. So Azure, and coming soon, you'll have the Copilot stuff that's built into Microsoft Office or Microsoft 365, which will allow you to, take a Word document, create a PowerPoint out of that, just by asking it. There is, and David, the thing about your customer experience knowledge. So there's Microsoft Virtual Assistants, which is essentially the chatbot approach that they have. And if you want to build a chatbot, like I'm talking about traditional chatbot, you build a flow, like a decision tree flow out of that. But actually, they're going to build GPT into that. So essentially, you can just ask it to build a chatbot that does these things for you, and it will use the Microsoft Virtual Assistant to then build that flow, again doing the majority of the work for you as well. So I think it's a lot of this is, it's not necessarily the core models, it's the extension of how how we're seeing those being used in the wider context, with applications that people are used to using on a day-to-day basis. This is really is the democratization of AI. If people can be using it within Microsoft 365, for example, on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, in fact, I don't know, Andrew, if you've seen this, but we've started to see some of these auto GPT applications, which kind of feed back into GPT or ChatGPT kind of model, where you give it a task and then it goes and executes the task end to end based on previous information and so on. So I mean that's also, well, I mean it's an interesting application which has kind of been built on top of these models. And I think a little bit of it also goes back to the skills question. I think one of the things that is speculated to become more important as we go along is the ability to use these tools. And there is the category of prompt engineering, which has sort of come to the fore as well, right? So being able to prompt these tools appropriately to generate the kind of output that you want to, that seems to be developing as a skill set in and of itself. And who knows, maybe that might be part of a developer skill set. Maybe it might be a standalone skill set on its own. It just might evolve along those lines.
I just want to make sure we're cognizant of people's time, and so we've got a lot of questions. We will come on to some of them. There's a lot around the security, some of the limitations. There's some really industry specific ones which unfortunately we won't be able to get to today in this context, because it would be not interesting to the rest of the audience. But maybe if we could move on to start maybe thinking about some of the risks and potential barriers. I know that seems to be a lot of the theme in terms of, but how do you assure the quality of the answers? Is there going to be a way of making sure the answers are valid, which I think Andrew, you've sort of said no, that's one of the risks. But maybe if we move on to sort of say the risks and the potential barriers, that may answer a lot of the questions we're getting. And then before we end on the hour, then we'll come back and see if we can answer any more specific questions. And obviously, the contact details of all this panel are available to follow up with via LinkedIn, etc., as well for specific questions. But gents, if you wanted to maybe give us a view in terms of what are some of those potential barriers and risks, that would be a great place to start.
Do you want me to start, Anil?
Yeah, sure, go ahead.
I mean, we could probably spend another 45 minutes just talking about the risks. I think it's one of those things where the benefits and the risks are both equal at the moment, and people have to be really, really careful about how they use these things. We've talked about hallucinations already, and I showed you with the looking for scholarly articles about how it can make stuff up. So people using it have to be really careful about how they interpret the results from that. There are other issues as well in terms of things like scalability. So at the moment, from an enterprise point of view, you just have to be careful about how often you're accessing it. If you want to use the API, for example, there's a small charge per API call that you'll be taken through if you're using it through Azure, for example. If you want to train it on your own documents, there's training costs around that as well. So you have to think about how, for small tasks, I think it's good, but if you want to actually base a new business on this, then you have to think really, really carefully. So I think scalability is one. Bias obviously is one of the biggest issues. As you said, it's trained on the internet, which is hugely biased. So you have to be really careful. We've seen with the image generation tools where you ask it for pictures of senior executives or CEOs, and it'll come back with white men more often than it will women or people of color. There's those sorts of issues that just ingraining historical biases into what people are doing as well. I think a lot of the existing AI risks are kind of within ChatGPT, etc., but there's just greater risk because it's so much more powerful as well. And then going back to, I talked about it being banned in Italy. One of the reasons was the risk of the leaking of the chat history. But the main one is around essentially breaking GDPR rules, because again, it's being trained on everyone's data. So, and the ICO in the UK as well, the Information Commission Officer is looking at this. It's taking people's creative work and actually creating new work out of it. So, and those people aren't being rewarded for that. So, one, that's unethical in the first instance, but also there's a potential that companies like OpenAI will be seen to be breaking the law, maybe banned or have to repurpose their models based on, based on new restrictions that the ICO and other people put on them after that. Annie, I think that's a few of them come off the top of my head. I don't know, Andy, if you can add to that.
Yeah, so I think you've covered most of the major categories, but let me just add a few more, probably specific instances of those broader categories that you mentioned, right? So one is, you still have the problem of regulation in general. So regulation, by the time it catches up to technology, generally it is quite late. And with the snowballing effect that now we have, because, again, a lot of these models have been pre-trained to a great extent. And now every version release will likely come faster and faster because you're kind of fine-tuning it and doing reinforcement learning. It can become much faster with greater capabilities. So I think regulation is far behind. You still have questions on things like IP. If I let's say create a short story using ChatGPT, do I own that IP? I could argue that I did it because I framed the prompts really nicely or so on and so forth. But does OpenAI own it? The questions around that or the nuances around that are still not really clear. There are some countries which have
OpenAI are saying that if you create something with their models, then you own the IP. Whether the ICO and the European people would agree with that or not is another matter.
Exactly. So again, it also varies by country, because I know in certain countries there are regulations which say that anything created by an AI cannot be claimed to be the AI's IP. All right. Yeah. I believe that's the case in the US and a few other places. But again, the nuances are far from clear at this point, and some of those will actually get clarified as those get argued in courts and so on. There's also the question of if someone provides the training data for this, again, do they have claim on what is generated from that training AI, right? And there are lawsuits in court right now which are debating aspects of this. So that's one. But I think more importantly, from an enterprise perspective, is and this is a general neural network or deep learning kind of problem, right? So explainability is still a challenge. So if you are making really critical decisions, so for example, if as a bank you're making the decision to examine the credit worthiness of an individual for a loan, you should be able to explain that in a court of law, because if you get hauled up for a discrimination lawsuit, you can't just say that, hey, I don't know, right? That's not an acceptable answer. So that is still a challenge. The other one, which is again a little bit more of a nuance to the data and security problem. So most of these, at the current point, they cannot be brought into, let's say, behind an enterprise firewall or within an on-premise system. Right? I'm sure we'll get there, but at the current point, they cannot be brought back there. And also user access control, role control, all those things are still not completely clear it's still not completely clear as to how you would do that, right? So those are still questions to examine. And then finally, there are, of course, there are those ethical considerations. I think, Andrew, you already mentioned bias in training. But even beyond that, there have been instances of AI being used for various things, facial recognition, law enforcement. All those are controversial. And if we get to a point where some of this AI gets really good, and I'm not necessarily talking about an AGI or a general intelligence kind of scenario, but even if it gets really good, then again you're talking about role restructuring, questions of wealth concentration, universal incomes, etc., and it becomes a much more of a philosophical question in some ways. But the reality is, like I said, some of this is really snowballing fast. So we need to have some structures in place to be able to start to answer these questions.
And Anil, I think that's a good point. And let me just quickly sort of bring this as we sort of get into the last 10 minutes. So we've had 53 questions. Apologies, we're not going to get through all 53 questions. But as I've said, there is definitely an opportunity to connect with us afterwards if you would like. We've also had, as we've put in the sign up in earlier on in the chat, we put the sign up to the viewpoint that we're producing, so there'll be another link coming up to that shortly, and so if you want to have more information from an Everest Group perspective on this topic, then please sign up for the viewpoint. What I'd like to do in the last few minutes, but before we do try and take a few questions, is, and you started moving on to that just then, Anil, but I want to get a view as to, okay, so what's next? We've come a long way from November, when 99% of the people had probably never heard of ChatGPT, to now, and that's what, 5 months, 6 months. What's next? What do we think's coming next, or where are we going? I think that would be interesting from an audience perspective. So maybe we start with you, Andrew, and then Anil, you can finish that off.
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think the pointing the models at your own data, I think as a demonstrator, I think is probably the next thing that's going to happen, and that's going to be a huge step forward, I think. But then maybe we're going to look at more personalized models as well, so you could build, going back to the risk, there's this huge risk about a small number of companies dominating this whole market, which is really worrying. And we've had that with search, etc. We're seeing some open source models come through, and I think as we move down, maybe this is a few years ahead, but companies being able to build their own models and put it within their own firewalls, etc. I think that's going to be a good way of doing it, and they can have it specialized to their particular markets as well. I think that's going to be really important. I talked about the APIs and the extensions into other applications. I think again, looking at the CX perspective, every application will have some sort of ChatGPT-like interface to it, and maybe even replace everything that we've talked about before in terms of how people interact with software. Alexa was meant to be the big way forward for that, but that's now showing its limitations and its age as we bring in these new models as well. So I think it's going to impact a lot of different areas within business, and also just within society generally.
Yeah, so I'll just maybe add on to that a little bit, and completely agree with what Andrew has mentioned. So currently, the use cases, so because of these limitations, so to speak, the use cases I have seen are generally more at least with the language models, in a business context, they're more limited to those usage of, let's say, the embeddings API, where you can actually contain it to a particular data set or a knowledge base, right? So, but I think all of that will change quickly, and you may have more fine-tuned models or the ability to fine-tune some of these models for particular context, or even potentially build some of these with large data sets. I know that Bloomberg had a model built on financial information or financial data and so on. So you may see some of those come up. And again, to Andrew's point about pointing it towards your own data, I think, and this for me, I think is one of the most critical things, because organizations need to start thinking about their own data and data strategy, right? And potentially this is something that analysts and consultants have been saying for a very long time now. But now, you may have to really accelerate that if you really want to be able to use some of these new tools coming in. And you may have to tweak it as well, so that it actually becomes more consumable for these kind of tools. So the data strategy definitely becomes more important. And I think one more thing which I'll add, which enterprises really need to keep an eye out for, is disruption, right? So similar to how digital banks have started to snip away the heels of more traditional banks, you could have a whole set of new businesses which are actually built on top of these tools, or built using these tools, and barriers to entry may actually lower in many cases. So definitely be aware of that, and I would also suggest definitely keep on top of that, and be aware of the latest developments, because all of this is happening really fast. So yeah, I think these are some of the things which are top of mind for me.
Brilliant. Thanks, Daniel. Andrew, any closing comments? I'm conscious we say we've only got a couple of minutes. We didn't want to take any more time than an hour. As we start to bring this to a conclusion, and as I said, a lot of the conversation, a lot of the questions were around the security, spotting deep fakes, those type of things. But they're very broad and all very deep topics, which we could be here for an hour just on each one of them. But as obviously a lot of people join, there's a lot of interest, a lot of passion on this topic. Any words of wisdom as we start to wrap up that you could leave us with?
Yeah, I think when people see it like a new technology comes through, everyone says, well, what's the killer app for that? What's the thing that's going to really drive that? I think with large language models, there's no killer app. It's just everything. It's just going to impact everything that we do, every application we use. It's just going to be ubiquitous across everything. So I think, that's one thing that people need to realize now. Having said that, people just need to take things cautiously and slowly. We've highlighted some of the risks within that, and if you're betting your company on it or a new service or whatever, do that really carefully. For now, these problems will get sorted out bit by bit, but I think for now, don't necessarily rush in. Seek advice, work out the best way of doing things and how you can manage some of those risks.
Thank you, Andrew. And last word to you, Anil, before we give people the time back. Any last comments, wisdoms that you can impart? Or do you want to just look at ChatGPT to see how you should finish off a session about ChatGPT and see what it says? But
so by the
any
way,
last
so this is so yeah, I know you said it as a joke, but this is potentially one of the applications of generative AI. I can see a future where a LinkedIn live session may just be sharing some images of the speaker and the script, and it creates a lifelike video, right? So we don't necessarily have to be live except for answering the questions, right?
Well, we should have had one of the team sitting there typing in all the questions we've had into ChatGPT and giving the answers back, so we could have said, well, this is what ChatGPT thinks about itself.
Yeah. Yeah. So anyway, so I think to your original question, David, I think like I said, I think it's really important to stay on top of this, and I think at Everest Group we are kind of following this quite closely. We are coming out with a report soon, which kind of lays the foundation. But And so definitely you can look at that as a starting point. But I would agree with Andrew in terms of the approach or maybe the mentality to take to this kind of tool, right? So it is definitely disruptive. The scope of these changes are really far-reaching, but I would say adopt an approach of cautious optimism, right? So while I wouldn't encourage anyone to rush into full-scale productions without knowing what the implications are, definitely experiment with it and keep on top of the changes which are happening, as we speak, almost in real time.
Brilliant. Thanks, Anil. And we're at the top of the hour, so thank you very much for joining. As I said, you'll have all of our contact details connect through LinkedIn or our Everscoop emails for Anil and myself. But all our details are available. Please reach out if you've got any specific questions. But thank you for your time today. Hopefully you found something from this to be useful. And if not, you can always go and ask ChatGPT about it. So thank you very much for your time, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.